Thanksgiving is one of those American holidays when families come together under one roof. People take a break from their busy lives, travel back home, gather around the dinner table, and spend time with the people they love most. In 2016, one family in Knoxville, Tennessee, was looking forward to that very moment. From the outside, the Guy family seemed like any other ordinary American family. But no one could have imagined that this Thanksgiving would become the last happy chapter of their lives. Joel Guy Sr. and his wife, Lisa Guy, had been married for 31 years. They had spent their entire lives working hard. Joel was an engineer who specialized in the piping industry, while Lisa worked as a records keeper and secretary for an engineering firm in Knoxville. Everyone who knew them described them as hardworking, honest, and kind people. There was nothing about their lives that seemed unusual. Joel had 3 daughters from his previous marriage. In 1988, he and Lisa welcomed a son together, Joel Michael Guy Jr. Lisa was known as a devoted and protective mother. The family enjoyed spending time outdoors, whether it was relaxing by the water or taking short trips into nature. After decades of hard work, Joel and Lisa were finally approaching retirement. They had devoted most of their lives to their careers and raising their children. Now that the kids were grown and living their own lives, they believed a peaceful new chapter was about to begin. They looked forward to traveling, slowing down, and simply enjoying life together as husband and wife once again. By November 2016, Thanksgiving weekend had arrived. In East Tennessee, the season transforms the landscape with brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. Lisa had decorated the house for the holiday, and the family was getting ready for everyone to arrive. Joel's daughters, their children, and other relatives were all expected to gather and celebrate together. But the person Lisa was most excited to see was her son, Joel Michael Guy Jr. He lived nearly 600 miles away and was finally coming home for Thanksgiving after quite some time. Lisa was thrilled that she would get to spend a few days with him. She had even planned to buy his favorite ice cream before he arrived. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A happy family, retirement just around the corner, and a holiday filled with love and celebration. But that happiness didn't last. Just 2 days after Thanksgiving, something happened that immediately raised concern. Lisa Guy never showed up for work. It wasn't just another workday. Her retirement party had been scheduled for that very day. As the hours passed, there was still no sign of her. Her coworkers tried calling her again and again, but none of their calls were answered. To the people who had known Lisa for years, this was completely out of character. She would never miss work without telling anyone. When they still couldn't reach her, her coworkers contacted the Knox County Sheriff's Office and asked deputies to check on the Guy family to make sure everything was okay. When officers arrived at the house, nothing seemed unusual at first. Joel and Lisa's vehicles were both parked outside, as if they had never left. The officers spoke with neighbors, who told them that the couple's son had been visiting for Thanksgiving, but since then, no one had seen anyone from the family coming or going. The officers also tried calling the house, but no one answered. Then they noticed something that seemed small at first. A faint sound of a dog barking could be heard from inside the house. Looking through the front window, the officers noticed several grocery bags sitting near the entrance. Inside were ice cream, meat, and other perishable items. The fact that they were still lying there 2 days after Thanksgiving immediately seemed unusual. At that point, the officers still believed they were conducting nothing more than a routine welfare check. But they had no idea that once they entered the house, they would walk into a crime scene that would become one of Tennessee's most disturbing family murder cases. After getting no response from inside, the officers began checking the back of the property. That's when they noticed something strange. The doorknob on the back door was completely missing. Through the opening where the knob should have been, they could see into the house. But what caught their attention even more was the intense heat pouring out from inside. It felt as though the temperature inside the home had been deliberately raised. At the same time, they could smell a strong odor of chemicals in the air. By now, there was still no way to reach Joel or Lisa. Their cars were parked outside, the dog was barking inside the house, and the grocery bags filled with perishable food were still sitting untouched by the front door. This no longer felt like a routine welfare check. The officers realized that something very serious had happened inside. The officers decided to enter the house through the garage. Detective Stephen Sanders arrived at the scene shortly afterward. The moment the interior door was opened, a blast of hot air hit them. The temperature inside the house was so extreme that it immediately stood out as highly unusual. Every step was taken with caution because no one knew whether the suspect might still be inside. The officers slowly moved through the house. The same grocery bags they had seen through the window were still lying near the entrance. The family dog continued barking, and it appeared to be in distress. As the officers approached the staircase, they noticed brown stains on the floor. At first glance, they believed the stains could be blood. The entire team immediately went on high alert. Their priority was no longer just finding Joel and Lisa. They also had to determine whether the attacker was still hiding somewhere inside the house. At the top of the stairs, they found a pile of blood-soaked clothing surrounded by large pools of what appeared to be blood. It was immediately clear that this was no ordinary crime scene. The officers quickly cleared the rest of the upper floor. What they saw forced them to back out immediately and secure the entire property. Fearing that a suspect could still be nearby, they surrounded the house from all sides. At that moment, the only living creature left inside was the family's dog, which was clearly suffering from the extreme heat and stress. The house was soon declared an official crime scene. Multiple forensic and investigative teams from the sheriff's department arrived to process the scene. Every room was photographed, every piece of evidence was carefully documented, and the entire house was searched in detail. Investigators now had two urgent questions to answer: what had happened to Joel and Lisa, and who was responsible? As detectives continued searching the house, they came across several items that changed the direction of the investigation. Around the blood-stained clothing, they found numerous bottles of chemicals, including muriatic acid, hydrogen peroxide, bleach, drain cleaner, and other highly corrosive substances. Finding so many different chemicals gathered in one place was extremely unusual, and investigators immediately suspected they were connected to the crime. In the middle of the bedroom, an exercise machine had been knocked over. The room was in disarray, and the signs around it suggested that a violent struggle had taken place there. In one corner of the room, investigators also found a large pool of blood, strengthening their suspicion that a brutal attack had occurred. The search continued until officers reached the master bathroom. Inside, they found two large blue storage containers. When they opened them, they discovered human remains. It was a horrifying scene that made one thing painfully clear. This was not just a double murder. It was an exceptionally brutal and carefully executed crime. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting. In the kitchen, a large cooking pot was sitting on the stove, and it was still hot. At first, investigators assumed it contained boiling water or chemicals, but when they looked inside, they were met with a horrifying sight: a human head. At that moment, one thing became unmistakably clear. The killer had not only murdered the victims, but had also gone to great lengths to manipulate the crime scene. What made the situation even more disturbing was that the police had no idea who the killer was or where they might be. All they knew was that the person responsible for this horrific crime was still out there. As investigators examined the crime scene, one detail kept standing out. Human remains had been found in different parts of the house. The strong smell of chemicals filled the air, and the numerous bottles of corrosive substances suggested that someone had tried to destroy evidence. But there was something even stranger. Whoever had done this hadn't finished the job. It appeared that someone had planned to make the bodies disappear completely. But for some reason, the plan had been interrupted before it could be carried out. The crime scene had been abandoned, leaving behind several clues that the killer likely never intended investigators to find. Later, criminal behavior experts explained that in cases like this, some offenders stop thinking emotionally after the murder. Instead of seeing the victim as a human being, they begin seeing the body as a problem that needs to be removed. While that does not make the crime any less horrifying, it can help investigators understand why an offender might go to such extreme lengths after the killing. At that stage, detectives had far more questions than answers. Was this the work of a random attacker? Could a member of the family be involved? Or was there another motive entirely? Nothing could be ruled out. Detectives knew that only the evidence would reveal the truth, and that evidence came sooner than they expected. While processing the crime scene, investigators found two Walmart receipts. The first was inside the grocery bags near the front entrance, the same bags the officers had noticed through the front window. The second receipt was found upstairs inside a Walmart bag stained with blood. The bag contained medical supplies, including bandages, tape, and other items commonly used to treat serious injuries. The moment detectives found those two receipts, they realized they might hold the first real clue to solving the case. Every Walmart receipt includes the exact date and time of purchase. Investigators realized that if they could obtain the surveillance footage from those exact timestamps, they might be able to identify who had bought the items. The Walmart store was only 2 miles from the Guy family's home. Detectives immediately went there and requested the security footage that matched the timestamps printed on the receipts. They started with the receipt for the groceries. The surveillance video clearly showed that on November 26, just 2 days after Thanksgiving, Lisa Guy had personally visited the store. She was buying the same groceries that were later found sitting untouched near the entrance of her home. That footage confirmed one crucial fact. Lisa was alive that day, and she had made it back home with the groceries. Next, detectives checked the second receipt. It was time-stamped at approximately 3:30 that same afternoon. As the surveillance footage began playing, the investigators' attention immediately focused on one man standing at a self-checkout register. His hands were wrapped in bandages, and he was buying more bandages, ointment, and other medical supplies. Watching the footage, investigators believed he appeared to be treating injuries that may have been caused by a sharp-edged weapon. But the biggest surprise wasn't what he was buying, it was who he was. Detectives had already seen his face in the family photographs inside the Guy residence. He wasn't a stranger. He was Joel and Lisa Guy's 28-year-old son, Joel Michael Guy Jr. At the time, Joel Jr. was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, nearly 600 miles from Knoxville. He had been pursuing an undergraduate degree at Louisiana State University for several years and hoped to build a career in the medical field. By all accounts, he was intelligent, academically capable, and appeared to be a quiet, ambitious young man. But behind the scenes, the family dynamic told a very different story. While Joel Sr.'s daughters from his previous marriage shared a close relationship with their parents, Joel Jr. had never formed that same emotional bond with the family. From a young age, he wanted to live away from home. In fact, he wasn't sent to boarding school by his parents, he was the one who insisted on going. Even so, his parents never stopped supporting him. For years, Joel and Lisa paid for nearly every aspect of his life. They covered his apartment rent, food, car expenses, insurance, and almost all of his everyday needs. According to investigators, Joel Jr. had never held a regular job throughout his adult life and remained completely dependent on his parents for financial support. But that was about to change. After supporting their son for years, Joel and Lisa had finally made a decision. A decision that would soon become the most important turning point in the entire investigation. During Thanksgiving, Joel and Lisa told their son something they believed was a practical decision for their future. But for Joel Michael Guy Jr., it may have changed everything. After paying for virtually every aspect of his life for years, Joel and Lisa finally told their son that once they retired, they would no longer be able to support him financially. They had spent their entire lives working hard, and they wanted to enjoy their retirement without the burden of ongoing financial responsibility. Investigators believe this came as a major shock to Joel Jr. According to behavioral experts, when someone is completely dependent on another person for financial support, and suddenly learns that support is about to end, they can begin spiraling into catastrophic thinking. Each thought becomes worse than the last. Over time, they may convince themselves that they have no way out. In some cases, that kind of thinking can push a person toward decisions that most people could never imagine. But at that stage, it was only a theory. Detectives still needed facts, and those facts began to emerge through the surveillance footage. Joel Michael Guy Jr. was supposed to return to Baton Rouge 2 days after Thanksgiving. The drive from Knoxville to Louisiana takes roughly 8 to 10 hours, and everyone believed he had already gone home. But the Walmart surveillance footage changed the course of the entire investigation. It confirmed that Joel Jr. was still in Knoxville 2 days after Thanksgiving. For detectives, that was a significant discovery. If he was still in Tennessee, it meant he had remained in the area even after the crime, making him far more important to the investigation. As detectives examined the CCTV footage more closely, they noticed another important detail. The self-checkout camera captured a clear view of his hands. Both of them were wrapped in bandages. The footage showed him purchasing more bandages, tape, and other medical supplies. Investigators believed those items were not intended for someone else, but were being used to treat his own injuries. By then, police had also captured his vehicle on surveillance footage. After tracing the license plate as the car left the Walmart parking lot, investigators alerted the FBI task force. A short time later, the FBI located Joel Jr.'s apartment in Baton Rouge. Agents set up discreet surveillance on the apartment, while detectives from Knoxville traveled to Louisiana. As soon as they arrived, Joel Michael Guy Jr. was taken into custody without any major resistance. But the investigation was far from over. While searching his apartment, investigators uncovered another series of receipts that made the case even stronger. The receipts showed that, in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, Joel Jr. had been purchasing supplies from several stores across Louisiana. The surveillance footage confirmed it. About 17 days before Thanksgiving, he was captured on camera at an Ace Hardware store buying the same corrosive chemicals that were later recovered from his parents' home. Another CCTV recording showed him using a self-checkout at Home Depot to purchase a garden hose, a garden sprayer, a bleach sprayer, and other equipment. Detectives compared every item seen in those surveillance videos with the evidence recovered from the crime scene. One by one, everything matched. The storage bins found in the bathroom, the cleaning equipment, the chemical containers, and the rest of the supplies, all of them had been purchased in Louisiana before Thanksgiving. By this point, detectives no longer believed these purchases were the result of a sudden decision. They believed they were part of a carefully planned operation. But the most shocking piece of evidence was still waiting to be discovered. While processing the crime scene, investigators entered a room that had once belonged to Joel Jr. There they found his backpack. Inside the backpack was his laptop, and alongside it, a college-ruled notebook. At first, it appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary, but as investigators turned its pages, they found page after page of handwritten notes. Later, prosecutors gave the notebook a name: the murder book. According to investigators, the notebook wasn't filled with random thoughts. It contained detailed plans for every stage of the crime: how to destroy the evidence, how to dispose of the bodies, and how to set the house on fire to eliminate whatever remained. Now, the CCTV footage and the notebook were telling the same story. Nearly 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Joel Michael Guy Jr. had already begun putting his plan into motion. One by one, he purchased the very items that were later recovered from his parents' home, and every one of those purchases had been captured by surveillance cameras. For investigators, this became some of the strongest evidence in the entire case. In their view, this was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a crime that had been planned well in advance. Around the same time, forensic experts completed their DNA analysis. The results confirmed what detectives had already suspected. The human remains recovered from the crime scene belonged to Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy. With the DNA reports, CCTV footage, purchase records, forensic evidence, and the plans outlined in the notebook, investigators believed they had built a powerful chain of evidence. Joel Michael Guy Jr. was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and abuse of his parents' remains. The brutality of the case left many people asking the same question: how could someone do something so horrific to their own parents? Many believed Joel Jr. must have been mentally ill. Investigators also believed that an insanity defense could have been a possible strategy for his legal team. However, according to the case records, Joel Jr. refused to pursue that defense. At no point did he claim that he had been mentally incapable of understanding his actions at the time of the crime. During the trial, prosecutors presented the jury with a detailed timeline, connecting each piece of evidence step by step. According to investigators, Lisa Guy had left the house to go grocery shopping on Thanksgiving. During that time, Joel Jr. attacked his father, Joel Guy Sr., first. Detectives believed he targeted his father before anyone else because he was the greatest physical threat and the most likely to fight back. The evidence showed that the attack took place in the upstairs room where the exercise equipment was located. Investigators believe Joel Sr. may have been working out when he was attacked. According to the medical examiner, he was stabbed multiple times. The forensic evidence also showed that Joel Sr. fought desperately for his life and resisted his attacker. During that struggle, Joel Michael Guy Jr. suffered a serious injury to his hand. Investigators later connected that injury to the Walmart surveillance footage, which showed him wearing bandages on both hands while purchasing medical supplies. After a short while, according to the prosecution, Lisa Guy returned home with the groceries. Investigators believe that the grocery bags found at the entrance showed she never even had the chance to put the food away. They concluded that she was likely lured upstairs under some pretense, and the moment she reached the top of the staircase, she was attacked. The forensic investigation also revealed that, after the murders, An attempt had been made to conceal the bodies and destroy the evidence. Investigators believed the plan was to place the remains inside the blue storage containers and eventually destroy them completely. But despite all the planning, the scheme was never completed. Detectives believed that Joel Sr.'s fierce resistance disrupted the entire plan. During the struggle, Joel Jr. suffered a serious injury to his hand, forcing him to leave Tennessee and travel hundreds of miles to seek medical treatment. The investigation also revealed that he later returned to the Knoxville area, but after noticing a heavy police presence throughout the neighborhood, he immediately turned around and drove back to Baton Rouge. According to the prosecution, the motive behind the murders was driven more by financial gain than by emotional rage. During Thanksgiving, Joel Jr. had learned that his parents intended to stop supporting him financially after retirement. Investigators believe that, faced with the prospect of losing the financial support he had depended on for years, he decided to carry out the plan to kill his parents. Prosecutors argued that he expected to inherit their savings and life insurance money after their deaths. However, the investigation uncovered another aspect of the case. During the trial, it emerged that Joel Jr. had previously been in a romantic relationship that had eventually ended. Although they had separated, investigators believed he had never truly moved on. While in jail, he made a phone call to his former partner, Michael McCracken. During that conversation, he spoke openly about his personal feelings.
So I have been in love with you since we first met 12 years ago, and I always got insanely jealous, and it became blatantly obvious that I didn't meet any of the criteria. There has never been any question about that, physically speaking. I could get bariatric surgery, I could get cheek face implants to give me facial bone structure so that I wouldn't have that round thing, as you call it. That's just sort of been an idle fantasy of mine, and we genuinely had a very, very realistic chance of being happy if I got around to doing that.
I don't know what to say. I'm angry and lost and confused and disappointed and upset and mourning you like you're dead, even though I'm talking to you on the phone. It's taking everything I have to process and maintain my sanity.
I think about you all the time. You were the only good thing in my life.
Providing investigators with additional insight into his emotional state. For the prosecution, however, the most important point was that regardless of what was happening in Joel Jr.'s personal life, the physical evidence, CCTV footage, forensic findings, and the written plans recovered during the investigation formed an overwhelming chain of evidence that was extremely difficult to challenge. Investigators also obtained a recorded jail phone call made by Joel Michael Guy Jr. In that conversation, he spoke about his deep feelings for his former partner. He said that he wanted to change his appearance and believed that, if he had enough money, he could undergo cosmetic surgeries and completely transform his life. According to investigators, he believed that doing so might give him a chance to win back the person he had loved for so many years. The person on the other end of the call sounded devastated. His voice reflected anger, heartbreak, and disbelief as he struggled to understand how someone he had known for years could commit such horrific crimes. For investigators, the conversation was more than just an emotional exchange. It further supported the prosecution's theory that Joel Jr. viewed money as a way to reinvent himself and pursue the life he believed he could never otherwise have. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire case wasn't just the motive. Whenever investigators spoke about the notebook, there was one detail they could never forget. On Thanksgiving Day, Joel Michael Guy Jr. sat at the same dining table with his parents. To everyone around him, he appeared to be an ordinary son, talking with his family, sharing a meal, and enjoying the holiday. Looking at him that day, no one could have imagined what was going through his mind. But upstairs, inside that very house, lay his notebook. A notebook that, according to investigators, already contained the detailed plan for murdering his own parents. And Joel and Lisa had absolutely no idea it even existed. Investigators later said that surveillance cameras played one of the most important roles in solving the case. Without the CCTV footage from Walmart, Ace Hardware, and Home Depot, it would have been far more difficult for prosecutors to connect the planning, the purchases, and the murders into one clear sequence of events. Each camera captured a different piece of the puzzle. One recorded him purchasing the chemicals, another showed him buying the storage bins and other equipment, and another captured him, after the murders, buying bandages and medical supplies with his hands already wrapped in bandages. When all of that footage was combined with the receipts, the forensic evidence, and the handwritten notebook, investigators were able to build a complete timeline backed by documentary evidence at nearly every critical step. That was why prosecutors presented the case as a premeditated double murder. According to them, this was not a crime committed in a sudden burst of anger, but one that had been carefully planned and prepared over the course of several weeks. In the end, the court found Joel Michael Guy Jr. guilty of murdering both of his parents. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The detectives and prosecutors who worked on the investigation later admitted that they had handled many homicide cases throughout their careers, but this was one they would never forget, not only because of the extraordinary brutality of the crime, but because the killer was not a stranger. It was the very son whom Joel and Lisa had spent their lives loving, supporting, and sacrificing for. Kent, England. In the small and peaceful village of Snowdon, 53-year-old Julia James was enjoying a new chapter in her life. She had recently remarried and was living a quiet, happy life with her family. She had 2 children, and everyone who knew her described her as warm, outgoing, and always willing to help others. But Julia was more than just an ordinary member of the community. She worked for Kent Police as a police community support officer (PCSO). Her role was not only to engage with the local community but also to support victims of domestic abuse. Helping vulnerable people and making them feel safe was an important part of her job. Because of this, she was well known throughout the area and highly respected within the police community. Julia's home was located right next to Ackholt Wood. The woodland was almost like a personal park to her. Whenever she wanted a break from her daily routine, she would often take her Jack Russell, Toby, for a walk along its quiet trails. Surrounded by dense trees and peaceful countryside, it had become a regular part of her everyday life. But at the beginning of 2021, something happened that slowly began to change that peaceful routine. One day, while out walking, Julia noticed an unfamiliar man standing near the woodland. There was something about his behavior that immediately made her feel uncomfortable. At first, she didn't think too much of it, but a few days later, she saw the same man again, and then again. Each time, he appeared in roughly the same area, and every encounter left Julia feeling increasingly uneasy. She eventually told her husband, Paul, that she had come across a very strange man on the woodland bridle path, and that something about him didn't feel right. Some time later, when Julia and Paul were walking together, she pointed out the same man in the distance, telling her husband that this was the person she had seen several times before. Paul also remembered noticing the man in the area around February 2021. Surprisingly, the encounters were never officially reported to the police. Experts later explained that in cases involving stalking or suspicious behavior, victims often hesitate to report what they're experiencing. Research has shown that many women go through numerous unsettling encounters before deciding to contact the authorities. They often convince themselves that it's probably just a coincidence, or that they might be overthinking the situation. Julia's experience appeared to follow that same pattern. For a while, she and Paul changed their usual walking route and avoided Ackholt Wood altogether. But Julia remained concerned about her safety, so Paul bought her a smartwatch. It wasn't just another gadget, it was an extra layer of protection. If Julia ever felt threatened, she could use it to send an emergency alert immediately. A few days later, Julia resumed her regular walks. Tuesday, April 27, 2021. At approximately 2:12 p.m., Julia left her home and, as she had done countless times before, set off toward the woodland with Toby by her side. Approximately 11 minutes later, at 2:23 p.m., Julia was captured on a CCTV camera installed outside a local business. The camera was positioned quite far away, but the footage showed a woman walking through a gap in a hedge toward Ackholt Wood. Investigators compared the CCTV footage with the GPS data from Julia's smartwatch. The 2 records matched perfectly. This allowed detectives to establish Julia's exact walking route. But only a few minutes later, the smartwatch recorded something that would later become a key focus of the investigation. Julia's heart rate suddenly spiked from around 97 beats per minute to approximately 145. At the same time, the GPS data showed that she had deviated from her usual walking route and was moving in a different direction. At that moment, no one knew what had happened inside the woodland. but both the smartwatch and the CCTV footage pointed to the same conclusion. Something had gone terribly wrong during what had started as a quiet afternoon walk. The data from Julia's smartwatch had already suggested to investigators that something had suddenly gone wrong. The sharp rise in her heart rate, followed by the unexpected change in her GPS route, indicated that she was no longer following her normal walk. After analyzing the movement data in greater detail, investigators believed that Julia had suddenly started running. The data suggested that she was trying to escape from someone. In their view, the most likely explanation was that she was being chased. About an hour and a half later, a local family was walking through the same woodland when they came across Julia's Jack Russell, Toby. The dog was alone, and Julia was nowhere to be seen. Finding Toby without his owner immediately struck them as unusual, so they began searching the surrounding area. Moments later, they found Julia James lying on the ground. Emergency services were called immediately, but there was nothing that could be done to save her. The post-mortem examination later revealed that Julia had been the victim of an extremely violent assault. She had suffered multiple blunt force injuries, a broken wrist, and catastrophic injuries to her head and face. According to forensic experts, the attack was so severe that she had virtually no chance of survival. She died very quickly. From that moment on, the investigation centered around one critical question. Who was the person who had carried out such a brutal attack in broad daylight and managed to disappear without being seen? Because Julia was a police community support officer, news of her murder spread rapidly across Kent. Fear quickly gripped the local community. Investigators shared the same concern. If the killer was still at large, could he strike again? Police immediately declared Ackholt Wood and the surrounding area a crime scene. The search operation was massive. The woodland covered a vast area, so investigators deployed line searches, fingertip searches, drones, and specially trained search dogs. Every inch of the scene was examined carefully, knowing that even the smallest piece of evidence could change the direction of the investigation. But detectives also knew that physical evidence alone would not be enough. They needed to reconstruct the killer's movements. For that reason, a major part of the investigation focused on collecting CCTV and other digital footage. Detectives instructed their teams to look beyond nearby security cameras and obtain footage from buses, delivery vehicles, commercial buildings, and any other possible source that might have captured the suspect from any angle. It was far from an easy task. Over the course of the investigation, police collected nearly 700 hours of CCTV footage. Every single clip had to be reviewed frame by frame. Meanwhile, digital forensic analysts discovered an important piece of video evidence that had been recorded nearly 2 hours before the murder. A CCTV camera in Aylsham captured a man walking toward the woodland with a bag slung over his shoulder. The camera did not clearly capture his face, but his movements immediately caught the investigators' attention. Approximately 31 minutes later, what appeared to be the same man was seen again on another CCTV camera. Then, at around 3:45 p.m., he was recorded leaving the woodland area. When detectives compared the timestamps of all 3 CCTV clips with Julia's smartwatch data, GPS records, and the estimated timeline of the murder, they believed the movements formed part of the same sequence of events. According to investigators, the man was in the area before the murder, and he was also seen leaving the same area afterward. This was the first visual clue that directly connected an unknown suspect's movements to the timeline of the crime. But the police did not want to rely solely on CCTV footage. They began identifying everyone who had been in or around the area at the time of the murder. During that process, local gamekeeper Gavin Tucker came forward. On the day of the murder, his vehicle's dashcam had been recording as he drove through the area. During his journey, he encountered a man emerging from the direction of the woodland. Gavin asked where he had come from, but both the man's response and his behavior struck him as unusual. Later, when Gavin learned that a murder had taken place in the same area, he immediately remembered the encounter. Without hesitation, he contacted the police and told them about the dashcam footage. At the time, he probably had no idea that the short recording captured by his vehicle would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. The dashcam footage clearly showed the suspect's movements. According to the recording, he ran toward Aylsham Road before turning off the road and heading back toward the wooded area. Investigators were also particularly interested in the bag he was carrying, which had already become an important focus of the investigation. Around the same time, The post-mortem examination provided detectives with a crucial clue about the murder weapon. After examining Julia's injuries, the pathologist told investigators that they should be looking for an object that was long, cylindrical in shape, and significantly heavier at one end. At that point, the weapon used to kill Julia had still not been found near the crime scene, so detectives carefully examined anything that matched that description. In addition to the dashcam footage, Gavin Tucker had also managed to photograph the suspect as he ran across a nearby field. Police released the image to the media and the public, but deliberately cropped out the portion showing the bag. Investigators intentionally withheld that detail so that, if the same bag was later recovered, it could serve as stronger evidentiary evidence during the investigation and in court. The investigation reached a major breakthrough shortly after the image was released. A witness recognized the man in the photograph as 21-year-old Callum Wheeler. 10 days after Julia James was murdered, on May 7, police arrested him. From the very beginning of the arrest, Callum insisted that he was innocent. He barricaded himself inside the house and resisted the officers' attempts to take him into custody. Eventually, police were able to arrest him without further incident. During a search of his home, investigators found an item in his bedroom that immediately drew their attention. Leaning against the wall was a railway jack handle, made of fiberglass and commonly used to lift railway tracks. Its shape and weight closely matched the description the pathologist had provided for the murder weapon. According to investigators, it also appeared to be consistent with the object the suspect had been seen carrying in the CCTV and dashcam footage. After taking Callum Wheeler into custody, detectives began assembling the complete chain of evidence against him. The investigation revealed that very little was known about him in police records. He had been living in Aylsham for a few years after moving from southeast London. According to investigators, he lived an isolated life. He had no close friends. DNA analysis showed that Callum Wheeler's DNA was present on Julia's clothing. Julia's DNA was recovered from the seized weapon, and traces of her blood were also found on Callum's training shoes. Based on this evidence, police charged Callum Wheeler with the murder of Julia James. He was brought before the court and remanded in custody pending trial. During the trial, the full sequence of what happened to Julia James on April 27, 2021, was presented in court. According to the prosecution, Callum Wheeler ambushed Julia in the woodland. Forensic evidence and medical examinations showed that she had been subjected to an exceptionally brutal attack. The injuries to her head were so catastrophic that investigators described them as some of the worst they had encountered in their careers. Medical experts testified that Julia was most likely rendered unconscious by the very first blow. Even so, she was struck multiple more times afterward. They explained that such repeated blows were not necessary to cause death, but they demonstrated the extreme level of violence involved in the attack. The investigation also established that Julia had not been raped. Forensic examinations found no evidence of sexual assault. However, detectives uncovered other evidence during the investigation that led them to conclude the murder was sexually motivated. In that situation, the defense could have argued that he had found the weapon later and had no connection to the murder. The court ultimately found Callum Wheeler guilty of Julia James's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and ordered to serve a minimum of 37 years before becoming eligible for parole. Even after the case was over, Julia James's murder continued to have a lasting impact on the investigation team.